Hey, church, I'm with one of my buddies, a fellow pastor and a mentor of mine, I will say, my old friend Timothy Lusk. Tim, welcome to the house. Good to hear you. Good to see you. You're looking
Thank,
well.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's an awesome opportunity. I'm talking a lot about redemptive living, and anytime I hear the word redemptive, or I see the word redemptive, or I see the word redeemed, I always think of you, and obviously that's
Hmm,
because of the ministry that you had founded and stuff. So I thought it was very natural for me to say, let me get my buddy on here and talk about what living is to him.
hmm.
So I'm really kind of curious. You've been a pastor for how many years now? So
51 years, yeah.
51 years. So you probably know something about redemptive living. So,
Hmm.
in your own words, from that great wealth of experience, how would you define redemptive living? Give us some insight from your experience.
Sure. And I'm delighted to be invited to do this. The first thing we have to get over for most Christians is the use of the word redemption or redemptive. Most people think about their eternal salvation when they use that word. When I use the word, I include that as the beginning point, but I'm also talking about how God transforms us over time more and more into the likeness of Jesus. So God sees everything in the eternal now, but you and I are living in time and space. And so it's the outworking of that salvation and that sanctification. So when I say redemptive living, I mean, how do we live in such a way that we help others in that process of God transforming us? So the question we're really answering is, how do people change? How do people really change from the inside out? The deep work of the Holy Spirit in us. A lot of change is external. We change our behaviors, but we don't necessarily change in our character. I'm really interested in how the gospel and the work of Christ happens in the deepest, most transformational ways in the life of a believer. So that's what I mean by redemptive living. So I asked the question: how does God change people? And I'm sure there's more, but I've come up with four elements. Of course, His Word. Everybody would agree God uses His Word. Secondly, His Spirit, certainly. And most people would probably admit that God uses His presence and power in our suffering. So He uses suffering a lot, pain and suffering. The one that people miss a lot is God actually uses us in each other's lives in a very powerful way. And that's the part that I wanted to bear down on and kind of research and figure out. So I came up with this saying, um, experiencing the transforming presence and power of Jesus Christ through grace centered relationships in the context of redemptive community. I like to wordsmith things, and then I can take those pieces and work
Right.
them out. But there's only two things ever changed people: sin and grace. So, how do we live grace filled, Christ filled lives in such a way that people experience Christ when they're around us, and that opens them up to God doing that transformational work? That's what I mean by redemptive living.
Okay. So you would say redemptive living has an individual component, but then it has a lattice group component too that kind of enhances the individual component. Is that what you're?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a part that you and I play in each other's lives, but also the Bible. There's so many plurals in the New Testament. In fact, almost all the commands are plural, not just us individually, but us as a group, as a family, as a community. And a lot happens in redemptive community when people are trained to be grace filled in how they relate to one another, and all those one another's that the New Testament gives us. I think there's like 103 of them or something.
Right.
Of one another, confess to one another, pray for one another. All that is part of the redemptive process that God actually uses us in helping other people. Uh, and so for and an outworking of that, for example, is when I'm doing marriage counseling with a couple, I will try to get them into a care team of people around them, sort of a small group of people that they choose, that they trust, and that community element that you just asked about,
Mhm.
that's really important in their transformation.
Mm, okay. So if somebody was brand new to the Lord, brand new to Christ, how do they get started on the journey to redemptive living? That'd be a good
Mm.
question.
Yeah, that's a great question because we know that what happens is a lot of people come into churches. If they're not involved deeply in discipleship in the first 6 months, they're just going to sit there for the rest of their
Mhm.
lives unless God, moves them. I I think the gospel moves at the speed of relationships, and I think when a young Christian comes into the church, you have to immediately surround them with really grace centered people who love that person no matter what, who's never going to walk away and walks alongside. The spiritual life is a journey, and we walk alongside each other. And what happens in that is because we're grace centered, people learn to trust, they learn to feel safe. That opens them up to greater and greater, deeper work of Christ in their life. So you can program that. You can
Right.
say we're going to a greeting committee or whatever, but the bottom line is it is Christ centered people, grace filled people, connecting with and staying with people in their journey. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's something that we have as a tagline on our church is where you become family, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the Lord adds, crazy uncles and sometimes, interesting aunts and
Crazy past.
sometimes crazy pastors. Thank you very much for that. So, y- yeah, I mean, so if you have that family mindset when you come to the church and you feel comfortable and it's like family, it's easy to get into that mode that you're talking about where you build those relationships and stuff.
and
So,
and it happens organically. So you came from Eastside Community Church, and you know what our people are like. It won't surprise you that people visit our church, probably do the same in your church, and they say, "I've never experienced such love, such acceptance."
right.
That's the beginning point right there, because people in our culture are very paranoid about religion, about Christians, about the church, and when they experience something that's opposite of what they expected, that's
Hmm.
really an open door for them.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you, my brother. I appreciate your thoughts. My church obviously will appreciate all those years of experience giving you those four things that I'm going to probably talk about here just in a little bit. So, how about that? So,
Good.
love you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining
Invite
me.
me. You
All
bet.
right.